Good morning and welcome. So I have a consultant that I work with, and she keeps recommending. I'm trying so hard to listen and be more obedient in the new year. Hi Donna, hi Liz. If tell me if I'm too quiet, or just wave if you can hear me. And anyway, I'm really trying to listen to her. But one of the things that she's been telling me is to really simplify and like take one topic and, just do that simplest, hi Donna, piece. But I sat down this morning and with this idea of just talking about the generosity of getting your needs met, like getting your own needs met. And there were so many threads, and I just couldn't. I was like, but that's connected to this, and that's connected to this. Oh, thank you. I'm glad you can hear me. And I just couldn't do it. So I'm going to acknowledge right off the bat that this might be a little bit of a longer live. And I hope those of you who can stay with me, stay with me. Please bring your questions, any shares. You can disagree with me. That's always awesome. Your own personal experiences. That's all really awesome. I love it when we get to interact here. So, kind of want to deal with, I would say it's like I want to deal with this in 4 chunks or layers. Let's call them layers. I like that word. But they're going to weave together. So I'm going to do my best to kind of, really look at each one, and then they'll also weave together. So the overarching piece and the biggest piece is really the generosity of getting our own needs met. And I want to talk about that specifically. I really wanted to talk about it specifically as being generous and not just like this necessity, or we all know we should do that, or it's a good reason for some reason, but we don't know why. So I really want to talk about why that's generous. And then they're kind of subsets, but they're like rivers that run into a bigger river, tributaries. So one piece of that, of course, is knowing what you want and what you need. And that's a piece that I see left out of the conversation around getting what you want or asking for what you want is, how do I even know what I want? And if I don't know, how do I find out? Or what, that's a missing piece I see for a lot of people. And frankly, I see that more for women than for men, but I do see it across the board. So once you know what you want, then there's asking for it. And once you've asked for it, and possibly someone said yes, or who knows, but we'll get to at that point when someone actually wants to give you what you want, there's this whole other side, which is how do we actually receive? And I'll probably do a whole separate piece on this, but to me that touches too much on what I call the myth of fulfillment, that I couldn't not talk about it at all. So let's call this 1, 2, 3, 4, and 4A or something in terms of topics. So I'm going to go in order and also look at how they weave together as we go. So again, welcome to those of you who've joined. And as always, bring your questions all along the way, and I'll pause and weave that in as we go. So the first part is really speaking to why getting our own needs met is not just necessary, but actually generous. And the piece I want to say about this, and this goes very closely with, again, what's a cliche, which is, right, put on your own air mask first and then help the people. But I think when we hear that, we look at why that's necessary. That this sense of well, if you don't have any oxygen, you're going to die, and then your child's going to die because you can't put on their oxygen mask, and that there's like a necessity. And so I think, again, it's actually this way that we start to go like, well, it's okay to get my needs met because it's necessary, not because it's a luxury for me, or just like, oh, it's actually an act of generosity that I can give to another person. As distinct, I know that I have had this thought, and I imagine that other people often think when we say to be generous, that we're talking about being generous to other people. How can I be generous to my lover? How can I be generous to my children? How can I be generous to my partner? How can I be generous to the people I work with? How can I give more? And that's what generosity means. And there's definitely, that's one side of the coin, or that's a whole piece of the equation, or that's definitely a piece of it. But I believe that who we then bring to a dynamic when we're willing to do the work, and this is where I'm going to touch on the other pieces, to actually know what we want, to ask for what we want, to be willing to receive what we want and what we need, that then the way that we show up, like who we then are for all those other people without even trying to be generous, is an act of generosity. And so to think of it actually in that sense, and where most of us probably know a person, hi Dana, thank you, who probably seems very generous, and they may think of themselves as very generous, but where it's all about like, what can I do for you? What can I do for you? What can I do for you? And it may actually feel a little bit draining, or they seem tired, or they seem burdened, or they seem, I don't mean empty really in a bad way, but like sort of they're starved in some way, but they're out going like, but what else can I do for you? You know, how else can I help you? And it actually often doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good to receive from somebody who's not full in some way themselves. Of course, that doesn't mean that if we're not 100% full all the time, we can't give to others, but that there's some place of being full where that comes, and it comes from a fullness that then allows our giving to others to be really generous. So the other piece that I really want to distinguish here around the generosity of getting our needs met is that I also see then that a lot of people then jump to the conclusion, it's like, okay, so how am I going to get my needs met? I gotta get my needs met, and that means I have to do it all. And that is absolutely not the case. But the willingness to do what it takes to get our needs met, which includes other people, it's an act of enormous vulnerability and generosity. So I'll come back to that a little bit, but that starts to bridge into this other piece of knowing what we want or need. And I would say, especially from women, again, although I do hear it from men, but especially from women, one of the kind of like number one complaints that I get is, but I don't know what I want. I just don't know, or how could I, like, there's sort of a, I don't know. And I would assert. So when we walk around like that, consciously or unconsciously, in a state of, but I don't know what I want, or like, I don't know, whatever, that we're actually an unconscious demand that other people figure out what we want and need. And that's tiring. It takes a lot of energy or attention to be the person who then is figuring out what we want and what we need. An example of this, out of the realm of like lovership or anything like that, but I think about my kids, because they're at a developmental stage where it's appropriate that I manage their wants and needs to a certain extent. I don't wait until they're falling apart hungry to feed them, but that takes a lot of my attention. Sometimes I think like, man, if I didn't have two hungry children, I could take over the world with this attention. But it takes a lot, because not only am I aware of my own self, but actually my attention is out here and it's feeling like, what time is it? When did they eat? What did they eat? Can I hear the tone of their voice? Does it sound, anyway, it takes a lot of this. And so that's a specific example, but actually it's true for all of us. And especially in romantic relationships or in close partnerships. Those can be working relationships, they can be friendships, but where there's a real closeness there, is that if we're unwilling, and I don't mean this in like a conscious, like I'm stubborn and unwilling to discover my own wants and needs, but in any way, if I'm unwilling to really do what it takes to discover what I want and what I need, there's an unconscious demand that other people do it. Because just not knowing what I want or not knowing what I need doesn't mean that I don't need it anymore. I still need it, but I'm leaving it up to other people to figure it out. And often they can't figure it out until we're in breakdown. There's a problem, and that's how we know that there's a want or a need that wasn't fulfilled. So there's a generosity actually to taking that time. And this is one of the main things that it takes. I see very few people who are really willing to do the work to discover what they want and what they need in their, in your living situation, in your work life, in your professional relationships, in your romantic partnership, in your marriage, in your, how work is divided up about the children, like all these pieces. What do I want and what do I need? Number one, all of that lives in your body. So there's a much larger segment of people who are willing to sit down and do some journaling or write New Year's resolutions or write lists or kind of do the mental work. And that's one layer. And I'm not saying that's not a valuable layer, but it's only one layer. And there's a layer beneath that, which is, this is the lived experience of our lives, is our bodies. It's where we walk, it's where we breathe, it's where we lie, it's where we, make love. It happens actually here. And so the capacity to find out, what do I want and what do I need, it resides inside your body, inside the lived and felt experience of your body. So to find that, it's going to take slowing down. It's going to take actual time. It's not going to take 5 minutes, okay, got to figure out what I want, like get with the program. It's going to take actual time to rest into your being and be willing to find out, what does it actually feel like in here? What is my body telling me? And from that, what can I start to discover about what I want and what I need? Often the surface layer of that is what's not working. What doesn't feel good? What complaints do I have about my life or my partner or my living situation? What complaints? And then we have to actually sit and sift lower than that. Below the complaint, what is the desire? So it takes time. It takes actual space where, I can't necessarily do this with my children, running all over and jumping on me and asking for snacks. Like, it takes some actual space. Sit with this, to breathe with it, to actually feel what's underneath that. What are the actual desires, the wants, the needs? And that's vulnerable. This is the first step of getting our needs met, is acknowledging to ourselves what our wants and needs are. And many people do not want to acknowledge to themselves what they want and what they need. Because once we've really acknowledged that to ourselves, we just can't lie about it anymore. So we're not obligated to ask for it or to tell our partner we're not obligated, but at a certain point, hi Kundan, nice to see you. It's like we can't lie to ourselves anymore about what it is we want and what we need. And it's vulnerable even to admit to ourselves that we actually have wants and needs. So, but that's really the first step. So we talked about getting our own needs met as generous, and it sort of removes us from being like a walking, talking, unmet need, right? Like if I'm not getting my needs met, then I'm basically like walking around unmet, and other people are not required to meet that, but it kind of has this pull, right? So there's the generosity of getting our own needs met, and then that first layer is even knowing what you want and what you need. And it's only really then that there's the question like, well, how do I ask for what I want? How do I share what it is that I need? And that is definitely, like there's a lot of different ways to do that. But the main things I want to touch on actually in this video are around the not skipping the step of actually knowing what those are, and especially at the deeper level. So many people will come, let's just say, to like a partner, and they think, oh, I'm going to get my needs met because I know what's not working for me. And what they really come is with a list of complaints or demands or fears. So I noticed it was even just recently, right? Like I've been doing this work for almost 20 years, and it was maybe 2 weeks ago or a month ago, it wasn't that long ago. And I caught myself in my own mind it was imagining going to my boyfriend and saying like, do you even wanna spend, blah, blah, blah time with me? And I was like, it's like I caught it and I could look at it and I was like, wow, that's a really, it's a leading question. I didn't sort of say like, wow, I really want to have a date night with you, or I really want to spend an afternoon with you. I really want to lie in bed with you and, do nothing but nap and talk for 3 hours. What do I really want? It was like, do you even want to spend time with me? And it's kind of funny, but it's really heartbreaking actually, because that to be on the receiving end of a lot of sort of complaint, you never lie in bed with me, or you never make the children breakfast, or do you even wanna, it hurts. So it's harder to do that when we drop down below the complaint and actually go like, oh, this is what I want. But it's an incredibly vulnerable step to actually then share that, like, oh, this is what I'm longing for. This is what I'm wanting. I have a desire. Can I share it with you? And it acknowledges that, I want to say actually at a real level, we all want to be self-sufficient, but we're not really. And so to ask in that way, to share in that way, it actually does acknowledge that we can't do it alone. So there's a lot I can do for myself. And there's a lot of things that's really great if I do for myself, frankly. But I can't lie in bed with my boyfriend by myself for 3 hours and talk with him about our hopes and our dreams. I can't do that. I actually need him to do that. And so it acknowledges like, oh, I actually need you. I can't do this alone. There's something I want and it requires you. And that doesn't obligate them to fulfill it. But it's one of the reasons that we don't share our wants and desires like that very often, because it demands that we admit to ourselves that we want and need things from other people. Thank you, Sam. it's also, to really, and this theme of generosity, it's also really generous. So often, I mean, there's a bit of a myth, and I think it's been kind of blown out of the water, at least like kind of consciously, but unconsciously, I think a lot of us still believe like, well, if they really loved us, or if they really knew us, or if they were really paying attention, they would know what I want and what I need. Like, isn't it obvious that I need that? Like, duh, you know? And then we're hurt and they don't know why, and you know, and this isn't just, it's definitely true in romantic relationships, but it's not just true there. It's so many relationships. I mean, I have it with some of the people that I work with that all assume like, well, they should know, or of course they know that, they're just not doing it. When the truth is, they don't necessarily know. And so it's this enormous act of generosity to actually offer the people we love the truth of what we want and what we need. So at the highest level, getting our own needs met is generous. And I want to say again that this isn't about fulfilling all our own needs ourselves. It's not like, okay, well, I got to get my own needs met so that I'm not needy, or so that I show up full. It's just that knowing that I actually have needs, being willing to admit that I have them, taking the time, taking the space, doing what it takes to actually find out what they are, being willing to share them, being willing to do what it takes with myself, with other people, that's enormous generosity. One part of that then is actually knowing what I want and what I need. And then there's the willingness to ask for it, to share it, right? These are all, they're actually steps. And if you skip them, things get wonky, right? But they're all actually acts of generosity. So then there's this piece of receiving. And, you know, when we're at the level of, hi, Donald. So just for anybody watching, you know, at this point, please continue to feel free to bring your questions or anything that you'd like clarification on, your own personal shares. I love all that. So when we're kind of at the level of complaint, again, both consciously and unconsciously, usually we imagine like, well, the result we want is to have these wants and desires fulfilled, met, for that to be done for us, or to be given to us, or to have it met in some way. But what I actually find to be true is that most people have a very hard time receiving the things that they most want. And that both in very subtle, kind of energetic ways, there's ways that we like, oh, if someone starts to give us the love that we're really longing for, the support that we've been saying that we crave, they start to actually give us what we want, and there's a part of us that goes like, oh, actually, you know, that feels too vulnerable. I'm afraid I owe you now. I don't know how to let that in. And, you know, frankly, it's become a little bit, I feel like it's become a little bit like cool to say like, I have a hard time receiving, and to start to use that as an excuse. Like, it's kind of cool to go like, oh yeah, I'm just too insecure to receive that. Or, but actually it's hurtful and selfish to reject the love that people are giving us, especially when we've let them like I want to be loved in this way. They go, great, let me love you in that way. Go, oh, no, that's very hurtful and selfish. Let me come back to that question in just a moment, Sam. I'm gonna do a little piece around this, and I'll come back to that. So it takes it's different, but there's a similarity. There's something distinct about it, but it's similar work actually to work on ourselves to be willing to receive as it does to even find out what we want. It actually takes the work of being there, of giving the space for it. It takes getting over ourselves, right? In that moment where someone offers and we want to go like this, it's like, I just have to kind of get over myself and how maybe I'm embarrassed or ashamed or terrified or any number of things that I might feel. Tears might come up. I might be afraid that they don't really want to give it, but my doubting them and being unwilling to drop that story and through all of it, not to shove it down, but like through all of it to actually soften and say like, thank you for loving me in that way. And there's a physicality to this as well. There's actually a physicality in the front of our body, in the throat, in the heart, in the belly. There's this physicality to allowing ourselves to be nourished by being loved, by being supported in the ways that we most long for. And that's generous. I imagine all of you have tried to give, have tried to love, and had it rejected, and how much it hurt, and how good it has felt when someone has let you support them, when someone has let you love them. And remember just what an act of generosity it is to allow the people who love us to love us, to let them love us. So I want to check these. I saw 2 comments come through. So Sam said, what about being vulnerable and asking for what you want, and then you're shamed and told that you're too much and entitled? So it's tricky, not knowing the situation. And I know you and I have had a couple interactions, but they've all been on Facebook. So I don't know you, I don't know your relationship. I don't know the person. Because on the one side, it may very well be that's not a nourishing relationship for you. If you can't come to that person and say like, gosh, I'm feeling hurt. I'm needing to have a conversation. Would you listen to me for 5 minutes? Or if you can't share in that way, or, I really need us to find a way to spend more time together because I miss you. And what's always coming back is some kind of like, you're just so needy, or whatever it is they're saying. I mean, I'm really making things up because I have no idea what your life is like. That there's a place, and again, this is actually self-responsibility. It's not about like, oh, they're bad and wrong, or they can't handle you, or any of this. It's like, wow, I keep feeling hurt in this relationship. Maybe I'm going to stop putting myself into the space of feeling hurt over and over and over again. Maybe this is kind of like a second cut of that, but maybe I can find out what's a way that they could hear me better. For instance, maybe I keep, meeting them at the door when they're coming home from work and they're exhausted. And then I say like, oh my God, I really need your attention. And I'm like, oh, maybe I can find out a better time or a better way to bring my wants and needs. Maybe I think I'm bringing wants and needs, like, and just sharing vulnerably, but I'm actually complaining. I mean, again, I'm really not saying this about you, Sam, because I don't know you, but I see that a lot. I work with a lot of men and women and couples, and when I ask people to say like, well, what, just so ask me right now what you would ask your husband or your wife or something, and they say it, I'll often find out like, oh, well, I can understand why they're not responding in the way you want. So sometimes it's about getting help of either from that person, how could I ask you in a way that would feel better? Or about getting some outside help from a friend or a, coach, or anyway, all these different sort of like that. Sometimes that. I had a third one. Let me just see if I can catch it again. Sometimes, so again, I don't know. It could be that this person is truly saying you're too much and you're entitled. Or perhaps sometimes we're also interpreting. And people are saying things like, now's not a good time. And we hear like, oh, you don't love me. And so sometimes, and again, this is tricky. It's sort of like you have to see over time, but sometimes it can be about, I really want to, it's actually giving our understanding to the other person first and getting like, God, what is going on for them that they're responding in this way? Of course, that can go on too long, right? It can become just abusive so again, an example with my boyfriend is that I shared with him that I was hurt about something and I wanted something, and he responded pretty sharply and kind of accused me of only wanting him when I was lonely or I wanted sex. And I was so hurt. It feels a little embarrassing to say this, actually, the whole thing, and I've just there's enough of kind of my own personal practice that it wasn't like because there's a way we can spiritually bypass, right? So it wasn't like I sort of went like, oh, da 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 da. I was just like, wow, that really hurt. But I also did think like, I wonder what's going on with him that he would say this. And I just kind of took a step back. Like I kept my heart open to him because I'd known him long enough, and our relationship is solid enough. I could just keep my heart open to him, and I could just imagine like where he's at. And it wasn't 5 minutes later he was like, I'm really sorry. And he just shared with me kind of what was going on for him. And we were ultimately able to then work it out to the place for both of us to get what we want. So it's complex. But there are times, I'm going to link back to the first one, there are times where it's okay to say the relationship such as it isn't working for both of us in some way. I don't get to say whether it's working for them, but I can say if it is or isn't working for me. And if I'm being blamed or shamed or told I'm entitled or how I'm showing up, I'm kind of like, either I need to find out how I can show up differently and see if that's going to work for me, or I need to find out what that person needs. We have to actually find a relationship where there's a match. So I hope that answers some of your questions, Sam. And feel free to leave another comment if you want to clarify or ask differently, and I'll keep going down. Thank you. Annie said, do you always recognize when someone is giving? Is that part of the difficulty of receiving? That is a fantastic question. So I actually think that is one of the deep pieces of work around being able to receive is, people say, like, if the only tool you have is a hammer, like everything looks like a nail or something like that, right? I'm probably butchering it. But there's a way that we do see the world through our lens. And sometimes, not that you're saying this, Annie, but, and this is an extreme, but there is a way that sometimes we look at the world and it looks like everyone wants to take from us. I mean, I go through phases where it's just like, everyone wants something, like stop wanting things from me. And, which first of all is usually a sign that there's something I need to receive, either from myself or from somebody else. But some of that can be like really early, right? And it's less that everyone wants to take, but there's a true belief that no one would want to give to you, or that such and such and such. And so we can't actually see when someone's giving. So the work of kind of open, and I would say this again is actually very physical, kind of embodied work. And it takes time. In my experience, it takes time. This isn't something that we just like decide to do, or even in one weekend, but that's certainly a start. But it's the work we do of opening our bodies through breath, through movement, through expression, through stillness, and often through, there's an act of trust. For instance, like if I think you're not giving to me, and then you say, I'm giving to you, there's a piece of trust of going like, what if they're telling the truth? And it's not to discredit what is my experience and say, oh, theirs is right. But it's like an act of trust to say like, well, what if that's true? Is there another way I could receive this? Or is there another perspective? And again, so I'm telling a lot of stories about me and my boyfriend, and I hope they're relating in some way. But I realized at some point, there were two, I kind of realized this ahead of time, but then I got confirmation through an Enneagram specialist I know. But my boyfriend does the 5 on the Enneagram. And a lot of times he'll come over and he'll start sort of like sharing data with me. He'll share interesting stories or kind of things. And like, I want to like connect, and I want to cuddle. And he's like telling me about some study that they ran on Olympic medalist, blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking like, what's the point? When do we get to the point? And over time, I realized this was actually one of his ways of like connecting with me and loving me. And then I talked to this Enneagram specialist, and I remember asking him, I can't remember what question, but it was something about how do you want to receive, or how do 5s give love? And he actually said, by sharing information. I was like, oh my God, that's what that was. Like, he's so wanting to love me. Or the other day, we were leaving his house, and he was like, wait. And he ran up and he took, I don't even know what this stuff is, but it's like magic stuff that you put on your windshield. And when it rains, you hardly even need windshield wipers because it just like pearls right off. And he knew it was going to rain in 2 days, and he wanted to take care of my car. So again, like, that's not how I give love. But actually taking the time to recognize how other people give love. First of all, how do I want to receive it? So I've let him know, for instance, that I want words of praise. And he's worked at being able to give that to me, even though it's not natural for him. But at the same time, I can actually do the work of looking at how does he naturally or organically give love. And I can actually receive it that way now, even though it's not like the primary way that I receive it. So I hope that answers your question. I know I went on a tangent there, Annie. Feel free to leave a follow-up if either I didn't make any sense at all or you want to clarify. Sam, okay, great. Well, I'm glad that was helpful for you, Sam. And again, now if anyone's here and heard any pieces of these, if you have questions or if you want to ask clarifying pieces, feel free. I want to circle back around through these kind of 4+1 layers that I was talking about. And then I want to end with this piece of the myth of fulfillment. And I'll do more on the myth of fulfillment at another time because it's kind of a big one. But really looking at this as this overarching concept, as a way, it's almost like a lens to look through, right? Like, oh, it's actually generous for me to get my own needs met. Not only is it not selfish, but it's also not just this kind of necessity, like, I guess I have to brush my teeth, so that blah, 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 or something, but it's like, it's an act of generosity to look at these layers of how do I get my needs met, and then it's like, it's not that you or I or any of us need to do it all on our own, but there's a certain kind of self-responsibility of saying, oh, I'm going to be responsible for even knowing how could I start to get my needs met? What even are they? Can I ask for them? Like the pieces of it. And of course, I would say pretty much any relationship where you're not getting any support around that it's just not a nourishing relationship for you. But there is something that I would say is valuable. Man, woman, whoever you are, is taking some piece of responsibility as an act of generosity, really for the world. Certainly your relationships, but as an act of generosity for the world of like, what would I need to do in order to get my needs met? And I say the first step of that is even knowing what they are. So that's the first act of generosity. Taking the time to do that, creating the space to do that, going deeper than just the mental piece, but diving into like, God, through the lived experience of my body, what do I need? And I don't mean just like, what do I need to eat so I don't, die or something, but like your body will tell you, what do you want and what do you need? And that's deeply generous. And then that willingness to ask for it, right? To ask for it from our friends, to share with our partners and our lover, like, what do I actually need? What do I want? What would delight me? I mean, that again, that's like a luxurious piece, but not just like, okay, well, at the bare minimum, I need these things. But like, how generous would it be to tell your lover how they could delight you so that they weren't trying to figure it out themselves all the time? And then they could spend that energy just delighting you. Because, I mean, if you're in a good relationship, your partner wants to love you well. They just do. And we all fail all the time, but we're trying. So give them a little help. And so that's the knowing what it is. And then that, being able and willing to ask for it, to share it, to be vulnerable enough, to be generous enough. It's kind of like handing over the keys to the kingdom. This is what I want. This is what I need. And not waiting until everything falls apart or there's some sort of breakdown or crisis to notice that a need wasn't being met, a need or a want. But to proactively create that inside yourself, inside all your various relationships. Again, this isn't just romantic and sexual relationships. And then there's the deep, deep work of actually receiving. It's receiving love in the way that people are giving it, even if it's not our natural or organic mode. It's receiving when they actually give us what we've been asking for, and we're like, oh God. I mean, I still catch myself doing this, and I see it a lot, where someone, maybe they've kind of like learned how to ask for what they want, and so they'll like ask, and then you're like, okay, here. And they're like, oh, thanks. But they like half take it, or 1/10. They like take the little piece and then sort of like, okay, great, now I've got it. Like, that was enough. I don't need any more. Thanks for all the hearts, Laura. I love the hearts. And so don't be that person who just, takes like the merest little bit. Don't be the person who's like, I'm fine. Because actually we want to give to you, right? The people in your life, they want to give to you. So let them love you. And which brings us to the myth of fulfillment. And the reason that I thought that this was necessary to bring into this is that I don't want this to seem like it's like a 4-step process to satisfaction, like where you get to the end and you're like, okay, they did the thing, so now I shouldn't want anything, or I'm done, or it's like, why do I still have desires? Or, desires are endless, right? This is what they say in Buddhism. Desires are endless. If you're a human, if you're still alive, if you're still breathing, there's some desire. You have desire for freedom. You have desire for love. You have desire for sex. You have desire for money. You have desire for touch. You have desire for cute shoes. You have desire for silence. You have desire for, like all the things. You have desire for praise. All the things. Forever. So I don't want to say that fulfillment, that you can never feel fulfilled. But what I find is that when you know that fulfillment in a way is a myth, it actually allows you to be more and more fulfilled and more fulfilled. Like at this deep, deep level, like, oh, desires really are endless. And maybe my lover, fulfilled my desires 5 minutes ago and I have new desires again. And like, that doesn't mean that anything's wrong. It doesn't mean anything's wrong with you, and it doesn't mean anything's wrong with them. It doesn't mean anything's wrong with the world, or your relationship. But just to recognize that in a way, like fulfillment, it's a bit of a myth. So I will talk more about that another time, because I think I've gone on for a really long time today. But I want to just give these last few moments again for anybody who was watching this whole time. I mean, first of all, thank you. But if you have any other questions or shares or anything you want to bring into this space, I want to give a couple minutes to make sure I can catch those. And if you come to this in the replay, I'll come back and read your comments then. So still feel free to comment, and I'll definitely check back in, and we can do it via writing. if not actual words. Thanks, Giovanna. I love the hearts. As always, I sort of imagined that I was scattered and didn't make any sense, but I do hope that there was something clarifying about this. I hope it was useful to somebody, and I'm always available for either questions or shares in the comments, or if anything feels either too vulnerable or too personal, you can always send me a private message and I will respond, although sometimes it takes a little while. Okay, thank you. Ciao.